So this morning is my 76th installment of my 400-part series on spiritual development. Not really, but it just seems that way. We're slowly working our way through the Yoga Sutras. Last time we talked about asana or posture and kind of more of the subtle aspects of that versus the practice that is known as yoga of having a mat and doing postures, but kind of the internal posture that one takes in spiritual practice. So today it's pranayama is the limb of yoga that we'll be talking about, and pranayama is breath work. And we'll do the same thing with pranayama that I've done with all the other limbs that we have covered, the yamas and the niyamas. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the basic practice as it's typically known, but then we'll move into the more subtle, causal, and non-dual aspects of that practice. The less of the exoteric and more of the esoteric or the inner practice of it, and what it represents. And I think one of some of the brilliance of yoga that I appreciate is that if you just looked at kind of the practical practice of yoga, it's a very thorough practice with a great deal of wisdom and intelligence on just a practical physical level. But also in there is that same kind of wisdom for an inner teaching, that isn't just a practical practice in the world like doing, like in the yamas and the niyamas, there's a lot said in there around one's relationship with food and eating properly. Right? But it goes much deeper than that into the kind of information we take into our mind, the kinds of thoughts that we think, and the effect that has on us, right? Physically, emotionally, mentally, developmentally as a person, the community around us, right? And so it is with all of the 8 limbs of yoga. They all have this dimensionality to them. They can be taken just simply on the gross or physical level, and they're very intelligent, good guidance for living a life. But they also have right there below that surface a teaching that has more depth to it. It is about our interior, and is perhaps we could say about our mind. And right behind that, there is something that is about our essence. And right behind that, there is something that we could say, about our soul. And on. Through the depths of our being, the Yoga Sutras have that same depth to them. Here, just because of the nature of this setting, I tend to focus a little bit more on kind of the mind side of it. But that is not by any means to say that is the primary even place to engage the Yoga Sutras as a guide in one's own spiritual development. Right? Any one of those levels could be the right place for you at the right time. Here, just tend to talk about the mind side or the psychic side. So that's what we'll focus on today. But I do want to talk a little bit about breath itself. Just the practicality of it, right? That the breath. We can think about the body and the importance of the physical vehicle. If you think about food, you can go without food for weeks, and you can survive. And if you think about water, you can go without water for days, and you can survive. But you can only go without breath for minutes. So it gives you a sense of its importance. But then if you think about where do we spend a lot of our time thinking, right? What seems important to us? We put a lot of energy, culturally into our food and nutrition. And there's a lot of intelligence about that's being put out all the time. Go to Barnes & Noble and look in the nutrition section, right? Rows and rows and rows and rows of books on food, right? And probably also true, but less so, water, right? There's some talk about water. We spend some time thinking about that. And again, you could go to Barnes & Noble and look for the books on water, and you'd find some. But then breath. How much does it get talked about? Almost not at all. And same thing, if you went to look to see how many books are there, a handful. So again, we have this kind of completely backwards. The thing that is most important to us, we have very little intelligence around. And the thing that is important, but less important, we have a great deal of intelligence around. Right? So this is just a good pattern to notice. Notice the tendency, for us as individuals, and then our culture. Me as a part of this culture, what is that relationship? And is there something to be looked at there? And might I need to have a different orientation, right, than what my culture has said, given me as the one to have passively, right? So this idea that breath has this just vitality, it's vital to us, right? It maintains us in a very immediate kind of way. So if we look at breath kind of a little more generalized, the sense of this rhythm in our body, right? So this in and out that just happens all day long. For the vast majority of it, we don't pay any attention to it, typically unless there's a problem with it. And then our mind may go to it for a while, and then again, it just fades into the background. But it's this constant rhythm that's there. So we have other rhythms, right? We have our heart. It's there doing its thing. And my day job, I practice craniosacral therapy, right? So this puts me in touch with another rhythm that is also always there, but most of us don't have any idea of it, right? But we have this rhythm that involves our head. Our head has a beat to it like our skull, right? Our brain is doing this little dance inside of our head all day long. Again, we have no idea, but it's there. It's very subtle, right? But that's happening. On an even more subtle level, right, just on a cellular level, we have a rhythm that's taking place. There's some research that was done about 40 years ago that I still think is some of the most brilliant research that's been done on protoplasm. Right? So protoplasm is this most basic living, the basic constituent element of life. Right? All life is built out of protoplasm. Right? So there's this thing called protoplasmic streaming. Right? And if you were to watch protoplasmic streaming happening, it looks like breathing. Right? This amorphous blob that has no structures to it. Right? It somehow has borders, but yet has no structure. Right? Protoplasm is a really interesting thing. And yet it respires in its own way. These very predictable rhythms, roughly 50-second cycles, that it does its thing. Right? It's absolutely fascinating to see. And in craniosacral therapy, our job is to listen to or feel that. Right? As the entire body, like an orchestra, that protoplasmic streaming comes into a kind of a singular alignment, and the whole body expands and contracts, like this inhalation and exhalation, and that's actually what we call it, primary respiration, right, on a cellular level. So we have that going on in the background, right, on this very primitive, primal level. And in craniosacral theory, we would say that there's another rhythm we call the breath of life. This is also seen in other traditions where they use the same term, the breath of life, but also other traditions where it's been given other names, but talking about a similar phenomenon, right? Something that isn't experienced so much physically, perhaps energetically, hard to put a word to it, but this sense of a rhythm, this breathing that is happening, but it is a non-physical breathing. So when we talk about pranayama, we start off in the yoga practice with the physical breath, right? Because it's important and it needs to be tended to. Right? Working with your breath is a way of working with your nervous system and helping to balance and regulate your nervous system. And obviously your nervous system runs all of the systems of your body. So if that central system is doing well, it's more likely that the entire rest of the physical body will be doing well. So it's an important thing to do just for physical reasons. But it's also a chance to bring us into relationship with this idea of this deep, kind of subtle, breath being a subtle rhythm in our body, and start to attune to this subtle rhythm and feel it. Kind of get out of the way, stop manipulating it, stop trying to be the doer of it, and become the witness of it, and just be with the breath as the breath does its thing. It's coming and going, and just kind of riding on the wave, right? Riding the wave of the breath. And we practice that, as a way to become tuned into these more subtle respirations that are happening. Right? One could become tuned into the subtle respiration on the cell, the protoplasm, right? The basic inhalation and exhalation of your very life force. Right? One could go beyond that and tune into the breath of life, right? And feel that and ride the wave of the breath of life coming and going. In the yoga tradition, they extend this out, right? So we kind of went from physical breath in to more subtle and more subtle forms of breath. They go out as well, right? All the way out to, for example, the Big Bang, right? And in the Hindu tradition, right, there's a whole cosmology around the idea of existence being breathed, right? That the Big Bang, as we would say in the West, was, the exhalation of Brahma, the universe coming into existence. And it will go for a period of time, and then there will be an inhalation, and then nothing. And then there will be another cycle of existence, right? This is their cosmology. And we're seeing more and more in the West, in our science, a similar idea growing, right? We have the idea of the Big Bang, very well thought through, and lots to be said about that. Lots has been said. But there's another theory that's kind of growing up alongside of it called the Big Crunch. Right? The Big Crunch is, of course, the opposite, when the universe starts to contract and it all comes back together, right? Pressed back into that single point and then out of existence. So this idea, cuts through Western or Eastern philosophy, Western science, this idea of this rhythm, this inhalation, exhalation. Whether it's a reality or a metaphor, we seem to be attracted to it. And if for no other reason than that, I think there's value in working with it. Whether it's true or not true, that's less important to believe. Whether you believe the universe is being breathed by a superior being, that's not so important. But that there seems to be these rhythms, and they're available to us, and there's value in getting in touch with them and learning how to kind of ride that wave, right? That there's value in that. That's my invitation to you, is to consider that, to do the practices that would get you in touch with that, and then evaluate for yourself. Right? So we kind of went from physical breathing to the breathing of the cosmos. Right? Big gap there. What comes in between, right? There's, of course, our own life, right? We're born and we die. Well, that seems like it fits the model of there's an inhalation and an exhalation. We come into existence, we go out of existence. And interestingly, we tend to think of life like that, right? Like this, what we're doing right now, this is the inhalation phase. This is our existence. This is the exhalation. The inhalation, we go out of existence. Then we're breathed back in. Right? But there's in the yoga theory, they would say, nope, turn that around. Right? So when you breathe in, there's a little pause. Then you breathe out, there's a little pause. Then you breathe in. The breath is bracketed by these little pauses. They would say that what we're doing right now, this life that we're living, this is one of the pauses. This is in between inhalation and exhalation. That we spend much more time in a state other than this. And then that's our life. This is the pause. I don't know. Maybe. It's an interesting idea to consider. But our job really is to get in touch with the current, learn to ride the wave. So we have this life as an inhalation and an exhalation. Within our life, we have patterns, right? Maybe it's work. We have a career for a period of time, right? And it's much the same way. It has a rising and a falling away. Relationships. Right? People come into your life, there's a rising, intensifying, and then a falling away. And I'm sure you can look around and think there's all kinds of these patterns in your life where that happens. Right? And we tend to have a similar relationship with them in that, in the rising of it, in the coming to be, if it's a happy event, right, we celebrate it and we become attached to it and we're enjoying it. It fills us, it nourishes us, it makes us happy, it's our pleasure. And we want it to continue. We want this, whatever it is, to become permanent. Right? We want it to be like this all the time. And then inevitably, like all things, it starts to be going to the inhalation, it starts to go away. And then, typically, we mourn that, we suffer that, right? Again, our attachment is there, we cling to it, we hold. Conversely, if it's something that is not a pleasurable event, right? The death of a loved one, right? That when that comes, we suffer that. We fear that suffering will go on forever. That adds to our suffering. And then, hopefully, that too comes to an end. It passes, and we continue on with our life, not in the same kind of the drama of the suffering of the early part. Right? So these phases happen to us. We go through these all the time. So that's normal and that's natural, and it's not that we want to stop that, and it's not that we could stop that, right? So hopefully we're beginning to understand that this rhythm is life. It's not a part of life, it is life. And that our job really is to get to a place where we can ride that wave. Right? Not get off the wave, not make the wave stop, right? But learn to ride the wave, right? The metaphor of surfing, right? Just surf the waves of life, right? The idea that I don't personally understand this. I find the idea of surfing horrifying, but I'm not a water person. But apparently, people who surf enjoy it. They find it exhilarating, right? So in much the same way, if we surf our life, we can find our life exhilarating, regardless of what's creating the wave. Right? And that's probably the radical difference. That's the radical difference that this particular practice in yoga is calling us to. Right? It is not about becoming a master of our physical breath, being able to suspend your breath for 2 months like some of these yogis do. Right? They get locked up in a glass case and they stay in there. And it's all very fascinating that they can do this. That is not the point. This practice was not designed for party tricks, right? So pranayama is to help us get in touch with the truth of these rhythms in our life and to help us learn how to ride the wave. And in that place, again, becomes irregardless of what is the content of it. What is the content of the cycle? We're not in the cycle. We're riding the wave, and we're enjoying the ride. Right? That's our goal. Now, that isn't to say we become indifferent to the part of our life, what's happening in our life. We don't become indifferent to it, separated from it. Right? This isn't about dissociating, but it is also about having this perspective. The Sufis have a great way of saying of being in the world but not of it. Right? You're fully participating in life, but you realize that the events of the life is not life itself. Right? And that allows you to have that foot in both worlds, fully engaged, but you're not, the flotsam and jetsam on the ocean that is just merely at the mercy of the wave, right? That's not the truth of you. Right? So this is the core teaching in the Buddha's four noble truths, right? This idea of suffering. Life is suffering. Why is life suffering? Life is suffering because we're attached. Right? Why are we attached? Because we have this desire, and this desire is that the good things don't go away and the bad things don't ever come. Right? The core of this, the pleasure principle, we call it. Right? And the fourth noble truth is, the good news is there's a way to break this cycle. Right? Those are the four noble truths, shorthand. So this practice is another way that we're being invited to practice the wisdom of the Buddha and the Four Noble Truths. This is an opportunity to break that cycle of the suffering because we're attached. We're attached because we have desire, or also he uses the word ignorance. It can be a tough word to swallow sometimes. But our delusion, right? That what is happening in our life, the content, the meaning that we're making out of our life, we mistake for our life. And that's the thing that we're invited to wake up from, right? That's they would say in yoga, the avidya, right? Or ignorance. That's the mistaken information that we need to wake up from. The practice of pranayama, working with the physical breath, starting to stabilize the nervous system, thereby helping to stabilize the mind, is helping to settle the very system that you need to have this understanding come into your mind and be able to bring it into your life and live from that perspective. So although it starts in the physical body, it moves through all the dimensions of our being. And it is a method, not just a philosophy, but a method to bring us to the realization of this peace, right? To give us the skills to be able to ride the wave, right? To just be able to be with the rhythm, to merely see whatever is happening in our life as that, merely an inhalation and an exhalation, right? Important, vital. We don't want to minimize breath by just saying breath is just an inhalation and exhalation, as we say it, right? The most important thing for our living being. And so are the experiences in our life. You know, they really are what life is about. But we want to have that same relationship to it. Right? That reduces our suffering. When we reduce our suffering, we increase our ability to simply be present. Right? To simply be present with what is. We can do that with a great deal more ease and depth if we're not suffering and then becoming polar to that which we're suffering. So, as we always do, these Sunday services, I want to let you do some exercises around this, right? And kind of look into it for yourself. How are you doing with the inhalations and exhalations in your life? Right? So you're going to get into groups of two. You can do a repeating question. Those of you who have been here before and done this, you know this, and you may partner up with somebody who hasn't done this before, or not, however that breaks out. But I will go through the practice a little bit more, but I want to say a bit about it before you go off and do it. So you're going to do a repeating question, and that question is going to be, and if you have something to write down, you can write this down. If you don't worry about it. I'll say the question again, and you're going to say it 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 times to your partner, so you'll catch on, and the other person, you'll have heard it plenty of times by the time it's your turn, so not to worry if you don't have anything to write it down. So the question will be, tell me about a rhythm in your life. That's the question, simple enough. Tell me about a rhythm in your life. And here, that word rhythm, I want that to open you up to all that I just talked about, right? That's the anchor word, right? For all that we just talked about. To look at your life, to open up to, in the moment, seeing these cycles, the comings and goings, whether they're small, a conversation within a day, right, that you have with somebody, and how that conversation, how that interaction goes, seeing it kind of rise and fall away. The coming together, the anticipation, the actual having of it, and then the ending of it, and the going apart again. It could be that small, that little thing. Or it could be much larger patterns in your life. Perhaps being a parent and the raising of your children, and then that transition. Not that they ever stop being children, but there's this point, hopefully, in which they really become adults, right? And what's that like, and how was that, right? Career, relationships, health, right? Your own self-image, right? And how that has changed or not changed, right? That's why we want to look into these things and find out where are we in them, right? But we all probably have in us someplace, some self-image that is anchored to a point in our life that was perhaps we have some particular fondness for. Maybe when we were at our best, It's when we were 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. It varies for everybody, but there's that place in there, right, where you kind of, like you had the world by the tail, right? And you have that in you. And there are moments when you may find yourself still kind of taking yourself to be that 25-year-old, right? But is that true? Right? Is that the breath that you can't let go of? Right? Its time has passed. It needs to, go back into non-existence, but we can't let it go. Right? So all of it, there's no limit to the number of cycles, these phases that happen in our life, in our external life, in our internal life. Right? So your question is just going to be, tell me a rhythm that you're aware of. Tell me a rhythm that you're aware of. Now, when you do this, your partner's going to ask you the question, and your job is to just answer from where you are, whatever's arising, right? Not to try and analyze the question, not to come up with the right answer, right? There are no points, no gold stars. Right? It's just letting the question work on you. Answer. They'll ask the question again. You'll answer. They'll ask the question again. You answer. And you just want to be willing to be surprised, right? These questions have a function, right? There's a process here. If you make yourself available to the process, you can be surprised at what comes up, right? This is an opportunity to do inquiry and to look and see and find out, right? So this is a very small moment, right, to take what we talked about this morning and kind of put it into practice. But the real practice, of course, is how you take this into your life and how you allow yourself to have this kind of contemplation, moment-to-moment contemplation on how you're engaging in the cycles or the rhythms of your day, of your life. Right? Sometimes it's easier to notice it in the people around you than to notice in yourself. You can go, oh, look at that person, they're just really stuck. Right? The movie, Waiting to Exhale, right? There's a perfect cultural example of it, right? You may look around and see somebody and go like, oh, they so need to exhale. Right? But ideally, we're looking at ourselves, seeing how we're doing it, but sometimes it's easier to see it in others. So that's going to be the exercise. So you can go ahead and move into groups of two. Just find a little space, take two chairs, turn them and face. I'll track the time for you. It'll be 2 minutes. Each person will have 2 minutes. You and me? Yeah, unless you've got something you have to run off and tend to, but otherwise. No? So I want you to just stay where you are. We're going to do another question. So we'll go back to the person who asked the first time. Right? So in our little metaphor here, the exhalation is the coming into being, and the inhalation is the going out of, right? So we kind of exhale in and then inhale, it goes back, right? So we're thinking of the exhalation as the kind of the coming in part of the cycle, the rising of the cycle, right? And then the inhalation of the going away. So this exercise is going to be around that inhalation phase, the going away, right? The ending of a cycle. And the question will be, what's wrong with inhalation? What is wrong with inhalation? Easy enough? And again, just whatever comes up in relationship to that, right? So this idea of the inhalation, the ending, the going away, the annihilation, right? And the question of what is wrong with ending, going away, annihilation? Basically with the question, what is wrong with inhalation? Okay? So what did you find out? What came up in your inquiry? Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Sure. Okay. Mhm. Grief. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Not good that you're feeling grief, but that you had all that awareness. Yeah. Yeah. Did anybody else find the second question difficult, or struggle with it at all? Did anything particular about it that? Mm-hmm. Sure. Good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Good. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah, so the second question, the way I experienced it was, it was hard for my mind. And I mostly, I felt fortunate for that because it allowed another part of me to answer the question. Instead of my verbal mind being there with some kind of snappy answer, I could feel my mind was frustrated by the question. There's a bit of a koan, my mind couldn't sort it. And so my body actually primarily was responding to the question. And similarly, I was able to get in touch with things like grief, but also the not wanting to, some sense of wanting to hold on. For me, it was like fear and dread that was behind the clinging, the holding. So I felt that although my mind would have liked to have a easier to understand question, it performed another function, which was to give another faculty an opportunity to express. And it's one of the things with doing this process, right? So I have many, many, many years of experience doing this. And so I'm used to kind of tuning into the other ways of knowing, other than just like my verbal mind. Somebody asks me a question, I think up an answer, which is, again, a fine thing to do. But as you do the practice of inquiry, you realize that you have other faculties besides your verbal mind, and they're worth listening to. There are other intelligences. So the second question was really designed more to kind of help open up that. So if you noticed it as a frustrating question, good. It was meant to be. Yeah.
Would you mind sharing what the second question was?
The second question was, what's wrong with inhalation? And so in our metaphor today of things kind of coming into existence and going out of existence. Exhalation was the coming in to existence, and inhalation was the coming out of existence. So death, annihilation, ending is represented by inhalation. So what's wrong with, another way to say it would be what's wrong with death, what's wrong with ending, like that. Use the metaphor of inhalation. Yeah, please.
I had a very positive experience because who I usually am struggle with that. So
Mhm.
it is I just took the judgment of it.
Good.
And so what happened is answers came out of me that I didn't want to give.
Wonderful.
That was a big part of me.
Yeah.
And it made me feel much more open. Quite honestly, it made me feel more open.
Very good.
But honestly, it really did surprise me because, both the vocalists said, helped me to sort of, oh, yeah, I thought of it.
Wonderful. Good. Thank you for sharing. Yes, I feel like this is one of the gifts that can come from this kind of practice, doing this kind of inner work, is when the mind gets stymied. Exactly as you said, you were able to get in touch with another part of yourself and be surprised. How delightful is that? To be able to be surprised by yourself. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. So Gary is giving me the indication that it's that time or near that time.
Well, you can continue talking.
Yeah. Yes, by all means. So Gary's going to pass the basket around, and if there are other questions or comments, I would love to hear them. Otherwise, I'll stop talking for a moment just to see if there's anybody that. Okay. So I'm here the second Sunday of every other month. That's probably too much to try and calculate. The good news is Lake Harriet sends it out. Yeah, exactly. Yep. They do a good job of helping us not need to remember the rhythm of my appearance here. So if going through, if this kind of approach is interesting to you, please come join us for the Sunday service, second Sunday every other month. We will be doing the next is the next the sixth limb of yoga. So we'll be doing pratyahara, or kind of study of sacred word, and the role and value of kind of being with the Dharma. And Dharma is a word that comes out of the Buddhist tradition, out of the Hindu tradition, but it's basically to be with spiritual writings, writings that take us to that represent that aspect of our nature that is beyond the conventional, beyond the mundane, to the numinous. And what's the value and the role of that? So we'll be doing the same thing, talking about the gross, subtle, causal, non-dual dimensions of studying scripture, and doing some exercises to look into it to see, what are we doing in our own life? What are we taking in? What's the effect of reading People magazine versus, the Diamond Sutra? Right? Look into that. And of course, Tuesday nights we have open meditation here at Lake Harriet at 7 o'clock. You're always welcome to come join us for that as well. And, what's that? Yes, down in the earth room. So perhaps just in the final moments here, we could just sit together. Again, just end with a meditation, prayer, centering prayer, working on your to-do list silently, whichever seems happiest for you. But we'll just sit together quietly for a moment. Gently begin to sense your body. Bring your awareness back into the room. And I want to invite you as you go into your day to just bear witness to the rhythms that you encounter. You encounter today, in the week, noticing that July has come and will soon be going. It's going every day, but we haven't hit the middle yet. Right? August will come and it will go. The year will come and it will go. So how is it to just bear witness to the cycles of your life, to the rhythms coming and going, and to just be with them just as simply as you sat now and were with the coming and going of your breath? How would that be? So thank you for coming this morning, and hopefully you'll stay for the 10:30.
I think there's coffee and pizza.
All right. Thank you.